have quite a bit of people online on the video. So good morning to you all as well. All right, I think it's about time that we get started. It's 9:34. So we're gonna just jump right in. That's all right with everyone. All right. So welcome again. This is the final meeting of the Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force. We made it through, if you recall, most of the changes and the edits to the final report during that last meeting we had in December. And it was kind of weird that we did that. We were hustling around and getting it done as we were just about to go right into the holiday season. So we don't mess around in here. It's a tough group. I love it. And we were working so hard and we were pushing, the recommendations forward and got most of the votes. So anyway, so we're going to try to finish up today that review with the edits that we didn't get a chance to get to last time. So the goal today is for us to finalize the report and submit it to the governor and General Assembly by this month. As you all know, we're late because it was due in December. So before we dive in, I did want to share that MDE, we released the Maryland's Climate Pollution Reduction Plan last week. Hopefully all of you read it. It's very short. I think it's only what?
It's a third of the length of the last one. So at 98 pages, it is a delightfully short read. Really.
And as you know, it includes new policies to support the building sector decarbonization. So the new policies shouldn't be surprising to anyone if you read the Pathway Report last summer and if you followed the Maryland Commission on Climate Change last year. So we are committed, as you all know, but I think I should repeat it. We're really committed to adopting zero emission heating equipment standards to require that new space and water heating equipment will produce zero emissions starting later this decade. Zero emission heating equipment standards are important for achieving Maryland's legal requirement to reach net zero statewide emissions by 2045. But since the standards wouldn't come into effect until around the end of this decade, they do relatively help us achieve the state's 2031 emissions reductions goal. We still need to march forward and do what we need to do when it comes to all that we have been talking about and all that we'll be talking about today. And this is among the reasons why MDE is also advancing clean heat standards so that we can provide consumers with incentives for electrifying space and water heating equipment and making other energy efficiency improvements starting in the next few years. Clean heat standards will also provide incentives to owners of large buildings to help achieve the BEPS requirements. And as you know, the task force number one recommendation is for the state to implement new revenue generating measures to provide additional state support for improving energy efficiency, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector. The clean heat standards are part of the state's solution to that nation. So if any one of you, if you want more information on how zero emission heating equipment standards and clean heat standards will work, my staff is here and available to provide any technical papers or anything else you need on those policies. So that's it for me with my opening remarks. And now I'm going to turn it over to Director Pinsky.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and welcome everyone as well. I must say that while we are behind the original schedule and we have taken it into January for this task force, the solar task force, which was also due by the end of December, has had to go into January as well. So it seems that a number of the task forces that require a fair amount of work have asked for an extension. So we're not alone. Let me just say that. Look, as the secretary said, MDE released its implementation plan, and it's bold. It follows the law passed 21 months ago, or however many months ago. I think the report before us also follow along those footsteps of being bold and cutting edge. So we're probably 95% done. I've marked about 5 pages with yellow that we still have to resolve. So I look forward to completing this report, sending it to the governor and the legislature to help them have a roadmap, particularly when it comes to buildings. It's a crucial emitter and can be at the center of this dynamic situation. If buildings start to change in an aggressive way, I think it can set the tone for a number of the other sectors that are affected by the implementation plan. So, look, I'm excited to complete this for lots of reasons, and look forward to this being a conversation among the legislature and the governor as well. So with that, Madam Chair, I think we can get to work. I would say our goal today, originally it said 9:30 to 11:30, is to have it 9:30 to 11. We actually have been called to Annapolis to meet with the governor and some other advocates on many of these related issues. So we're going to have to get to Annapolis. So I think we can do it. I think we have completed most of the work, the bulk of the work. So just keep that in mind, that we would like to be concise in our comments. We'll hear for and against, and then we'll vote things up or down, and then we'll have a final vote, I believe, is what's recommended on the agenda. So with that, Madam Chair, back to you.
All right, let's get started.
Sure.
Turn it over to you.
Thank you. We will start with any public comments. If any members of the task force want to make any comments before the task force enters its final round of wordsmithing its report and then leading to a final roll call vote on the report. So are there any members of the public that would like to make comments before we begin today's agenda? Okay, hearing none, seeing none. I'm going to hand it over to Cliff Majerzik, the task force facilitator from IMT, to walk through the remaining edits to the task force report.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Madam Secretary and Mr. Director Pinsky. I am Cliff Majerzik with the Institute for Market Transformation, IMT, and I'll be facilitating our conversation. And I'm going to try and share my screen. So the first item is to, if anybody has any objection, those things that were marked in yellow, we will be going through one by one. But there are a few small edits. We didn't deem them substantive, things like noting that the climate report, the climate plan has been released already, that are not in yellow. If anybody objects to having those added, please speak now. Otherwise, we will move on to those that are substantive. All right, and as a reminder, if you're online, just raise your hand, use the hand raise function, and we'll try to recognize you. I do see there's someone who's raised their hands. Away, I think. All right, so the first substantive change is to the building and energy codes prescription, and this falls under the current context. Policy context section. It's the final bullet of the policy context section. And this is, there are a couple suggested changes, and we've tried to emphasize those into what you see here in highlighted yellow. And I'll read this very quickly. The CNSA required that the Maryland Department of Labor's Building Codes Administration study options for development of an all-electric building code. Statewide building codes were most recently updated in May 2023 based on the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, IECC. The CSNA requires that Maryland adopt the 2018 International Green Construction Code and continue to update new sections of the IGCC as they are published. Maryland has long used national model energy codes and model energy and building codes, including the IECC BEPS to regularly update statewide building codes. The model codes may provide assistance in reaching the state's goals of adopting low or zero carbon construction standards by 2031. Do I hear any objection to this synthesis? Right. None. We will consider this accepted. All right. Now we have jumped pretty far ahead, jumping to the tax incentive section. And before we get to there, just we have previously been recommended that the various sections be sort of consolidated and viewed as subsections under a broader heading. And so this heading, securing capital for the building energy transition, has been added. Now, tax incentives. So you see text here in yellow. And remember that we had previously discussed, there was a earlier suggestion of 3 to 7 year payback. And you can see that some of the edits here reflect the vote of this task force previously on that in this section. So at the top, tax incentives are a common path to incentivize owners to make a desired action, close funding gaps, and improve cash flow. And perhaps I have it on the screen here. It is page 22 of 35 as it appears on in the Google Doc. I can read it, or we can allow people to read it for themselves as people like. All right, I'll let people read for themselves unless someone wants me to read it. And this is, it should appear as page 22 at the bottom of the page, looking at the page numbers. Stick with the changes on 22, and then we can go separately to this.
Louisa, did you want to recommend a one-word change on page 22? You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, actually, if I could recommend 2 one-word changes, I'd appreciate it. The first sentence in the second paragraph, the revenue used to cover expenses for most large commercial buildings and low-income housing comes from rental income. My understanding is that MTE does not really have a feel yet for what percentage of the buildings actually are rental properties as opposed to owner occupied. So I would just suggest that most there become many, since we don't know whether it's really a majority of the buildings or not.
So I'm typing that, oh, sorry, I'm suggesting mode. I'll type it in suggesting mode so that people can see it. But does anyone object to that change? All right, let's go ahead and make that change then if there's no objection.
And then the second one is similar in scope. The first bullet item, where we're talking about making improvements cost effective. Realistically, based on my experience with buildings that I'm working with in Baltimore County, trying to get them to the greenhouse gas target is probably never really going to be cost effective. It's what we need to do. It's what we should have been doing for decades. It's what we have to do. But as far as actual dollars and cents, I mean, one example of a building, we've got a 34-year payback. No tax incentive is ever going to make that cost effective, but they can make it more cost effective. And I would just like to insert the word more between improvements and cost effective.
Okay, so add it. The suggestion is to add more, so it says to make it more cost effective. Anybody have any feedback on that? The first bullet here.
The state should put in place long-term tax incentives sufficient to make improvements more cost effective to encourage owners to decarbonize.
So the only word is more?
Correct.
And what's the significance of more?
Because if you say you're gonna make it cost effective, then you need to get my $9 million that I need to make that cost effective for a 34-year payback down to something that I can actually afford. If it's less than the years of the equipment. That's for one building. I've got 25 more and I'm one property owner.
Okay.
So if you could maybe get it from 34 to 30, that would be great. You're not going to be getting it to 10.
Any feedback on that suggestion? Yes, you have a hand up.
From Luke.
Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, so the addition of more does seem to indicate that we're basically letting the state out of helping buildings make this feasible. And I would just like to say I think it's important that the state really make an effort to make this more cost effective, because otherwise the work isn't going to be done at the scale it needs to be done. So I personally would not want to add the word more. That's my thought.
Any other feedback on that suggested change? Tom, go ahead.
Morning, thanks. I'm going to turn off my camera. I think my connection is a little bit weak. I agree with Luke, and the faster and the deeper that we want these emissions reductions to happen will require, I think, more state incentives and more state financial support. And this softens that commitment, this additional language.
Any additional comments? Ben, go ahead.
There you go, double muted. So you've got a real stick already in you will do this by 2030 or you're going to start getting a fee. By 2040, you're going to have a real fine. And that changes your cost effectiveness math in a way I think folks aren't really thinking about. If you're paying, we've done several buildings now that they're going to be paying $50,000 a year in fines if they don't do these requirements. And that changes your cost-effective math pretty fast. I think Louisa's more is very reasonable. Expecting the state to step in and pay the whole gap of a 30-year payback is asking a lot.
So that was speaking in favor of putting in more?
Yes, that's speaking in favor of.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna call him myself.
Please.
Yeah, no, I support putting in the more. I think for us at this point, early January 2024, to imply that the state government is going to cover everything is just unreasonable. I think we want to make this happen. There are going to have to be incentives. There's no question. We want to move this along. I think at the last meeting, we decided what had been recommended of 3 to 7 years was way too short in terms of the investment horizon. And I think, we're keeping it somewhat general. And what is the right number? Is it 10 years? Is it 12 years? Is it 15 years? I think it's unclear, but I think we have to strike a balance of committing the state to help this move along, but not saying it's going to fall on the shoulders of state government fully. So I support the more.
Tom has raised his hand again. Go ahead, Tom.
Thanks. Look, I would just say that the building industry isn't expecting the state to carry all of this. It's just the portion that's unrecoverable. And that's the cost effective, the essence of the cost effectiveness. And if we're counting on massive penalties to move the market and change the cost effectiveness math at the building level, I think that's a really difficult, abrupt, confrontational way to implement. It needs to be some significant commitment on the part of the state to step in where the mandated improvements and repairs to these buildings don't provide a cost-effective outcome at the building level.
Should we call the vote?
Yeah, so I think we're going to call a vote on this. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, partly a comment, which is that, I mean, part of the question I had about this section was the relationship with the other section titled Support BEPS Compliance of Commercial Buildings. I think Director Pinsky made the point at the last meeting that since we have standards and there are legal consequences for non-compliance, technically you don't need an incentive at all. The incentive is the consequence for not complying with the law. So either we're talking about a matter of framing, changing from maybe tax incentives to tax subsidies, or saying tax incentives for achieving BEPS standards early or something like that. I mean, so it's more of a question of what it sounds to me, based on the conversation we just had, that this section is about BEPS compliance. And in that case, maybe then we have to reframe this as tax subsidies for BEPS compliance. Or if it is to remain incentives, we're talking about early achievement of the BEPS standards. But I don't know, so that's partly a comment and partly a question. I don't know if other people read it that way. But it almost, I guess reading it now, what I would do is sort of, it sounds to me, assuming this is all about BEPS compliance, say that, and then maybe label the additional section on support BEPS compliance of commercial buildings, like additional support for BEPS compliance or something to that effect.
There is the BEPS compliance section that starts on page 24.
Right. But I guess my question is, isn't this also about BEPS compliance? These tax incentives?
I think that the context here is definitely leaning toward BEPS compliance, although I don't see harm in broadening this to be a tax incentive proposal that could be accessible by the entire commercial building sector, including smaller commercial that's not covered by BEPS. Because as we've proposed in the new climate plan, if there are other standards coming down the pike that could increase costs for some buildings because they'll face some additional retrofit cost, I would say whether they're covered by BEPS or not, if we had a tax incentive program, might as well make it accessible to all building types.
So there's been a call for a vote. We're going to go ahead and take a vote on the proposal to add the word more. I note that Margaret Evans has a separate proposal. After that, we can consider her proposal that she's put in the chat. So all in favor of adding the word more, if you're in the room or online, but only if you're a task force member, please raise your hand. Again, only task force members may vote. Okay, and I'll note that there are some proxies as well, and we'll be recording those too. So in the room, there are 7 hands raised. All right, everyone please lower your hands. Online, please lower your hands. All right, everybody opposed, please raise your hand. Again, only if you're a task force member. Okay. It looks like there are 5 hands raised online. There were a couple raised before. What's do we have a couple?
It was 9 in favor of adding more, 5 opposed to adding more.
Okay. 9 to 5, the motion carries, more is added. So Margaret, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead. And also, can I just ask, did you mean to say as cost effective as possible? Go ahead, Margaret.
Yes, I did mean to say as cost effective as possible. If everybody's already voted to add more, I'm not sure that it's something that we have to discuss at this point, but that was an alternative suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. So Margaret's withdrawing that. Okay, so the rest of the changes on page 22. Any other comments? If not, if nobody objects, we will accept them, or if there's an objection, we'll take a vote. Okay, hearing no objection, all the changes on page 22 are deemed accepted. Okay. Now going down to page 23. There's a long section of new specific tax incentives that have been suggested, and those are all in yellow. I'll give you all another minute to read these.
Okay. Who proposed these?
These were proposed in the letter that came from 5 real estate stakeholders. I know Tom Ballantyne, who's online, is one of those. Luke Lanciano
Okay.
is another.
So maybe we can just ask, are there any questions now about any of these? So we could take them maybe one by one, or just get a vote and get asked. That way we could try to speed it up.
Okay, so you're proposing that we consider them bullet by bullet.
Yep, just quickly though.
Okay. All right, going to the first bullet. So that, again, this is under incentives.
Wait a minute, it looks like before we start, you have a basic question?
A basic question concerning all the tax incentives.
Okay.
I'm not sure if the intent is to only apply to the BEPS covered buildings. If so, some of these do not necessarily meet the BEPS regulations, like LEED O&M or some of the DOE standards. My recommendation, because I think all of these are potentially very good ideas, would be to make a slight change to the bullet heading that says tax incentives that should be considered. To either change that to could be considered, so that we're not saying have to, or to say that they should be considered once they have been improved as necessary to meet or exceed BEPS. Otherwise, I personally think all of them could stay in.
I have a comment along the same lines. I'm actually worried about the word considered, because to me, it kind of reflects that we're saying, yes, you should do this. And I don't think the task force discussed any of these or got any details with regard to how much they cost. So I would just say tax incentives that should be investigated include, and then that way, I think that would take care of your concern as well.
That would take care of my
So
concern.
Louisa, you accept that as the
Yes.
proposal?
Yeah.
So the proposal is to strike the word considered and replace it with the word investigated. Does anybody want to speak to that proposal? Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I like the suggestion. We could add, I mean, it may not be necessary, but to get at the question of how much these cost, you could add analyze, investigated and analyzed, but it may be redundant, but I like investigated.
All right, so we're going to stick with just investigated. Is that right, Mark? That's you happy with that?
Yeah, I mean, I like adding analyze because I think it gets at the sort of question of how much it costs more than investigated does, but
Susan, would you accept that as a friendly amendment?
Absolutely.
All right. So the proposal is to strike considered and replace it with investigated and analyzed. Does anybody object to that proposal?
Analyze what tax incentives that should be considered,
And then on.
Yes.
analyzed.
No, investigated and analyzed.
Oh, investigated and analyzed.
All right, raise your hand online if you object. Otherwise, we'll consider that proposal to be accepted. Okay, I see no hands. So this becomes investigated and analyzed.
Director Pinsky has his hand
Oh,
up.
go ahead, Director.
I just want to be clear. Is this the list in toto? In other words, tax incentives that should be analyzed. Does that mean maybe others that don't need to be analyzed but still could be considered? Again, I don't want to wordsmith too much.
Do you want to add something like, but not limited to?
Or among the tax incentives that should be analyzed and investigated and analyzed should include or something. I just want to soften a little bit. There might be some other tax incentives not on this list, and it could be implied that they shouldn't be investigated and analyzed, which they shouldn't be considered.
That's
So
great.
I'm sorry, did somebody have a comment?
I said
Go
I
ahead.
agree, and that's a great point. I think it could say not limited to, or however you want to wordsmith it.
All right. But not limited to, is that
Yeah,
good?
not limited.
Include but are not limited to?
Right.
All right, is there any objection to that change?
Is a hand from Tom?
Go ahead, Tom.
It's not an objection. I put my hand up. I agree with with Director Pinsky's point. I think the construction and the interpretation of include is not limiting, but the language you proposed does the same thing, so.
Great. So I hear no objection to that change, so we'll deem that accepted. So I think we're going to now go through bullet by bullet. So the first bullet, Montgomery County's efficient building code property tax credit for both existing and new buildings, which offers a scaled property tax exemption for 5 years based on achieving certain efficiency targets and earning LEED O&M certification. Does anybody object to that bullet? Okay, I see no objection, so that bullet will be deemed accepted. New York City's 421A tax credit program designed to encourage development of multifamily housing. Any objections? Yes, please, Mark.
not necessarily objection, but I'd like to hear more about this from whoever proposed it because I'm not familiar with the substance.
Could one of the proposers of this addition speak to this addition and what is the New York City's 421 tax credit? Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, I'm not a tax attorney, but 421A is essentially a property tax. I believe it's a property tax exemption for a period of time that it was used to encourage multifamily development in large parts of the city. And, the idea is that it was successful at encouraging that development and could be utilized in some fashion for, high efficiency buildings, meeting certain requirements. I didn't want to specify too much of exactly how I thought it should be developed, but it did seem to be a successful tax incentive approach used in another jurisdiction.
All right.
I-
Go ahead.
I don't know. To put this in here where we're not real familiar with it. I don't know if all of you are totally familiar with it, but I'm certainly not. I think we would need a little more time to just look into it before we actually put it into the report. When we haven't had a chance to have a conversation about it or even look into it. It's just the way I feel about it personally right now, at this point.
So you're suggesting striking that bullet?
Yes, because I don't know anything about it and we haven't had a chance to look into it. Or am I wrong? Okay,
No, I mean, we are recommending investigation and analysis. Partly because we don't necessarily know that much about them, or in some cases realize that they may not completely align with BEPS. So is that just part of the investigation analysis?
okay,
It's a good point that your very reasonable critique might hold true for a number of these where we just,
yeah.
the task force didn't spend much time, if any,
Okay,
discussing these.
okay.
But you're left with the big picture question.
It's
Do you,
just
do you
work
want to
for somebody.
recommend investigating and analyzing things that the task force didn't have the opportunity to discuss?
Would it be helpful to add that, essentially add that statement somewhere in here, acknowledging that these are these are suggestions that have been made. We haven't had the chance to look through them, but we recommend going forward that whoever's handling this part, here are some things to think about.
Yeah, because it kind of looks like, exactly, that's pretty much where I'm going. I mean, it's showing up in a Maryland report. Tax incentive should be investigated and analyzed as if, you know something about them and it's something we're looking at in Maryland when we're not. We don't know anything about it.
May I offer this potential suggestion? While the task force did not thoroughly discuss these changes, several members suggested that tax incentives that should be investigated and analyzed include but are not limited to.
Can you say that again? Click more slowly.
While the task force did not thoroughly suggest them, several task force members suggested that tax incentives that should be investigated and analyzed include but are not limited to : All right, does anybody object? I'll write it out and people can see it before you have to decide, but.
And as you're writing that, if that's typical, basically how we're looking at these incentives are just ideas that we should just look into and consider, then I would say there's no point in going through all of them. They are not bounding us to anything, but it's just allowing us to continue to do more research on areas that can benefit the industry and all. So with that, I don't know if I can file a motion just to approve, just have a vote for these, if that's all it is. We're not tying Maryland's hands in any way. Unless any of these on here are just so bizarre, so crazy. You know, like jump off a bridge first, then do the analysis. Go, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree, Madam Chair. I think we should just take a second. If someone really wants to remove one because it's so egregious, we'll give folks a chance to do that. If not, we should just accept them in toto, given the broad context.
I have one question, I guess, about the third bullet. I just wonder about the feasibility of this, making the existing and recently expanded federal tax deduction usable by more projects. That's a federal program. Is this eligible as a state recommendation? I'm not familiar enough with it, but the wording of it makes me question if there's anything that we can do to make that more usable.
I think that if you read the rest of that suggestion on the third bullet, it does talk about the state providing money. It's another bullet, the 45L bullet. That's like the fifth bullet. That one reads to me like suggesting changing a state tax credit that I don't think a federal tax credit that I don't think the state has any power to do.
making the updated federal 45L tax credit eligible for new or substantially reconstructed homes that meet applicable energies. So, okay, so yeah, that's, yeah, that also reads to me like changing a federal program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll add, if we're gonna stay in the, this is no harm kind of paragraph here of all these incentives, instead of making, because what we're saying, if we're keeping it general, saying, look into these things, because they could be good. They could be really good for Maryland. Then if we say, you know, the tax incentives that should be investigated and analyzed, we should keep the language the same. So on that one, it wouldn't say making, it would say tax incentive that should be investigated and analyzed, include, so it would just say the federal 790D tax deduction. We're just pushing the reader to that program, look into that one, investigate that, and analyze it. It's not making it do anything, it's look into it, right? So I would take making out, all these makings out, and just keep it in a way that we're saying we should investigate these things.
In some cases, I think we can just take out the making and that would make sense. In other cases, I think there need to be further edits to accomplish what you're describing.
Okay, well, let's go to providing.
Okay, providing that GHG emissions reductions related improvements to buildings do not increase the assessed value of buildings for real property tax purposes. What would you suggest we do to that bullet?
I'm confused with this one, actually.
Yeah, Secretary, if I could, first of all, I like your suggestion. I think OPC definitely doesn't want to vote for this in any form if it's definitely a directive for the legislature to analyze all these, because that could be quite a project in cost. We also have problems with these particular bullets about assessed value of buildings. I mean, I think there's a lot of question about, first of all, what improvements count? And second, I think it strikes us as sort of just unfair that if you're making improvements that will improve the value of the property, why should the assessed value sort of be frozen in time? Why shouldn't that value be taken into account for property tax purposes? So, I mean, I'm open and would love to hear more whether these sorts of changes have been implemented elsewhere. But to me, these seem like ones that maybe should not be here at all.
Because I thought in some cases, like for solar panels, I thought that was already exempt from property tax.
Is that right?
On residential, I thought.
I don't know.
I'm not sure, but.
I see there's a hand raised. I think it's Tom, right?
Yes, thank you. I think that's part of the genesis of this is that there is precedent in the solar panel realm for those improvements not to increase the tax burden. And we're trying to, I think the group was trying to expand on existing programs and complement them, use concepts that have been applied in other places before, and address the issues related to accessing capital, either through loan vehicles or accessing the existing equity in the building to apply it towards decarbonization projects. And if the result is higher taxes at the end of the day, it just makes it more difficult for the projects to pencil out.
But what are we asking to be investigated and analyzed? In these three, the providing, what are we saying? We're to stick to the first sentence, tax incentives that should be investigated and analyzed. How does these three fit into that?
Which three are you referring to?
Providing, one that says
The
providing.
one that start with providing.
So it almost doesn't read as tax incentives should be investigating and analyzing. It's almost like a just do it in a way to me. I
Are
don't
you
know if I'm reading it right.
Are you proposing that these three be struck?
If we can't find a segue into the sentence that starts off what we're saying, which is this section is simply saying tax incentives that we believe should be investigated and analyzed are the following. If it doesn't fall into that below, it shouldn't be there.
And I think Mark suggested striking the three that start with providing. Is that an accurate characterization, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I wasn't aware of the exemption for solar panels. And I'm trying to, it seems with solar panels, that's a very sort of discrete improvement to the building. Whereas the kind of improvements we're talking about here with HVAC systems and building shell improvements, I don't know if it's as simple to sort of separate that from the assessment. I mean, and also I don't understand a lot about how buildings are assessed for tax purposes. So I'm a little bit in the dark here. I guess the reason I made the comment initially is that I can imagine this being extremely expensive. You're going to be improving the value of these properties in part by lowering their energy bills over time. And so I don't know, maybe if we're softening the language just to say investigate and analyze, it's okay, because then we'll understand what the potential costs are. But it seems like a very large category of exemption. And I think that's why I just wanted to understand more about it.
I see that Senator Kramer, you have your hand up. Go ahead, Senator Kramer. We can't hear you. We still don't hear you.
Yeah, you got me. Thank you. I apologize, and I had come in late. I just got back from another meeting with session starting this week. It is a very busy time. I would disagree with what I just heard about striking these possible exemptions. This is all going to be a significant burden on the owners of these buildings, and the notion that we should not even contemplate certain exemptions to help offset those significant costs doesn't make sense. The chair indicated these are just concepts to be reviewed. Nothing here is cast in stone. This is all just, hey, here's some ideas that might be beneficial and might help to move the ball down the field. So I would suggest that the language in all of this remain as is. It is conceptual. It is just an idea to move forward. And I would ask that everything in the way of those bullets remains. Thank you.
Susan.
Not that I'm actually wedded to these three, but I developed a possible rewriting of them that might take care of the secretary's concern. For the first bullet that starts providing that, you scratch providing that and just say whether GHG emissions reduction related improvements to buildings should be exempt from the assessed value of the buildings for real property tax purposes.
That gives it direction.
Yeah.
What it is we're saying.
So that would
So
be,
why don't we just do it that way?
that would be, and you would apply the same formula to all three bullets.
That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody object to Susan's suggestion? Repeat it. Well, go ahead and repeat your suggestion.
Okay, for the first bullet, you would scratch providing that, and the sentence would now read, whether GHG emissions reduction related to improvements to building should be exempt from the assessed value of buildings for real property tax purposes.
Okay. Does anybody object to Susan's suggestion?
We just reworded it to make it fall within the same language. And all three fits in that, so you could just change it for all three like that.
Should be exempt. What was the word after exempt, Susan?
From,
From the assessed value?
yeah.
Okay. All right. Maybe from influencing the assessed value or from altering?
I thought from
Okay,
covered it, but if
all right.
you aren't comfortable with that.
Okay, no one objected to that. Go ahead and tell me how to do the second bullets.
Okay.
You have that.
Yeah.
Whether GHG emissions reduction related personal
Personal
property.
property should be exempt from the assessed value of personal property. Essentially, I think it works for all three.
Yeah.
All right, did I hear someone raising their hand? And then whether GHG emissions reductions associated equipment should be exempt from sales tax.
Mhm.
All right. So it seems like we have reached agreement on these three bullets. Were there other changes that any member would like to see to this page 23? Okay,
All
I
right.
see no hands, so I think if one objects. Go ahead.
Just a quick thought that if you say should be exempt from the assessed value of personal property, it can almost sound like you have to now subtract it from the value of the property. So I think what we are really trying to say here is that if any improvements are made, it should not impact the assessed value of the of the property. So maybe we want to add the word impact.
Where are you suggesting adding it?
Right where we have made the very nice improvement saying whether. So if you look at the first bullet where it says whether GHG emissions reduction related improvements to buildings should be exempt from impacting the assessed value of buildings.
Is that okay with you, Susan?
All right.
All right, and were you suggesting changes to the other ones as well, Smith?
Yeah, so it would be the same logic.
Impacting the assessed value?
Yeah.
And actually, I point out that this bullet now reads as though even if you haven't added it recently, it doesn't say anything about improvement. So the second bullet would suggest that even something that was put in many years ago might be exempted.
Yeah, this second bullet actually doesn't, I couldn't figure out what exactly we are saying there. It needs something.
I think if we just add the word improvement before related, I think that would sort of somewhat address that.
I think we're almost there. Let's get there.
Okay.
I think it needs related improvements rather than just the word improvement.
I'm sorry, related improvements?
So whether GHG emission reduction related improvements, just like the one above it.
With a S at the end?
Yeah. To, and then the word to personal property.
Okay.
And same thing for the third bullet, I think.
Related improvements?
Yeah, to.
Okay. Is this, I don't know that the sales tax is not so much of an issue. Actually, I'm not sure we need to make these changes because the sales tax only applies to new purchases.
Yeah.
Right.
That one's okay.
Okay.
Right.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to approve this now. I think, right?
Yeah,
Okay. All right, let's finish. Did you have changes to these three? If not, if no one objects to the wording of these three bullets, we'll deem it accepted. Okay, go ahead, Director Pinsky.
no, I was just,
Oh, you want to turn your attention to the page 24, the last ones you may not see. Just take a quick cursory look at those three. Make sure they fit into the paradigm of what we're saying, and then we can vote to get this one cleared and move on.
Yeah, I'm curious about the next to last bullet, assess the land beneath solar panels at the lowest tax rate in the jurisdiction. Is this appropriate in a report concerning buildings? And it seems it doesn't reference buildings, and the reference to solar panels, you could have a solar panel associated like on site with a building co-located, but it seems to me this bullet could be interpreted also as referring to solar panels generally, which not necessarily agreeing with that, but it just seems perhaps beyond the scope of this particular report.
Is the motion to remove it?
Well, I guess possibly, but I'm also interested in hearing from whoever proposed it as to whether it could be narrowed so that we're talking about solar panels that are associated with buildings, or whether there's an argument that even if the panels are not co-located, this should be there.
Okay. So who, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to ask if there was a proponent that could speak to this bullet.
And share with us how it relates to buildings.
All right, go ahead, Luke.
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that the building energy transition is not simply just buildings. It's, it's everything related to how buildings get energy. And, solar build out in Maryland is not nearly as quick as it probably should be. So in some ways, like just arguing for the more expansive view, this could help with solar developers just in Maryland generally. Whether we want to tie it specifically to a building, I think given the context of this report, I guess that would be okay. But I think it's worth considering as an idea to help with building out the solar capacity in Maryland, because it's a way that an owner or a developer of a solar project can basically get a payback for that project. The state does not have as lucrative rec prices as neighboring jurisdictions like Washington, D.C. So this is just one avenue to help increase the number of clean electrons in the state.
Director Pinsky.
yeah, look, I appreciate that, but I think it does go beyond our purview. I mean, buildings is really the focus, and there is a solar task force just completed its work, should have a report out in the next week to 2 weeks, and have dealt with many of these issues of trying to encourage expansion of solar in the various sectors. So I think that's dropping something in here that we haven't discussed, and another group of people have discussed. I think if we're going to keep it in, it ought to be building related, either building or on the building or co-located. But beyond that, I just think it's not fair, to throw something in here that we haven't discussed while other people have in fact discussed it. So I don't disagree substantively. I just think process-wise, it's not the right place.
So yeah, I hear that as a call to remove it. Before we go further, I see Tom has his hand up.
So I think in the spirit of a compromise, that the Senator Pinsky's, Director Pinsky's proposal that it be narrowed to buildings is, keeps the concept on the table. I think the reason that it's important to keep the concept on the table is that in the Montgomery County case studies of net zero buildings, it was very difficult to achieve the levels of reduction without on-site solar and credit for that on-site solar generation. So for those reasons, I think it should stay. If you want to wordsmith it, I think that would be something appropriate, but it should stay in, I believe.
You want to wordsmith, vote to remove.
I'm fine in the spirit of compromise, and this will be twice in one meeting where Tom Valentine and I have agreed, so.
All right, we're gonna,
And it's still a spirit of looking into, right? It doesn't, so go,
Nothing's locked in.
that's right. Had something? You?
I was just gonna propose a change, if that's the way.
go ahead, Susan.
So, assess the land beneath solar panels co-located with a building at the lowest tax rate. So you just add the co-located with a building there.
People like that? All right,
Yeah.
Kathy, go ahead. Go ahead, Kathy.
Kathy, you're in.
Can't hear you.
I apologize. I wanted to agree with Tom based on Montgomery County Green Bank's experience with this. And I think that just leaving it as loose as possible to allow for the development of the right solution rather than trying to define it at this moment is our best bet.
I agree.
So we have Susan's proposed language, which I've typed into the bullet. Does anybody object to accepting this bullet with that addition?
I would object.
What's your suggestion, Kathy?
Leave it as written.
Okay, it sounded like Tom and Director Pinsky were in agreement on that one. Do you want to take it to a vote?
I don't think many people are opposed to that.
To what? To the language that Susan's.
Yeah, because you just threw out a quick one. Because you're the only one who made a recommendation to change just slightly, right?
Yes.
Are you okay with us just leave it the way it is? Or,
Well, I think leaving it the way it is, I would vote to strike it.
Yeah. I like the co-located language as well.
okay,
All
on
right.
that case, let's go for it.
So
Kathy,
if
you
I,
wanna-
if I could just comment, so in the situation where we're looking to advance community solar, there may be situations where co-located is not an option here, but the value of the project to achieve BEPS for a particular property owner that has, say, 30,000 square feet of space, but it's not, isn't going to put the solar on that location, but is going to deploy solar in a location that will support their work. So I think we should allow this to unfold as we
let's
develop
vote.
solutions.
What about
One more, and then we're gonna vote.
Louisa,
Just to clarify, the way that site energy is defined within BEPS,
Yeah.
solar doesn't help. Whether it's on-site or off-site, it's ineligible for a reduction in EUI.
Yep.
So while I think solar's a great idea, it doesn't actually contribute towards BEPS.
so are you speaking in favor of Susan's?
I'm perfectly happy with Susan's addition.
Okay.
All right, let's take a vote on that one in
All right.
particular, and then we can.
All in favor of accepting the bullet? Mark, did you have a quick?
Oh, no, I was voting earlier.
Over eager.
Accepting the bullet as it's now written with Susan's addition. If you're a task force member only, raise your hand, whether you're online or in the room. Okay. We have in the room here 7 votes for it. Okay, you have the count online now?
7 plus 8 online makes 15 in favor.
Okay, we have 15 votes in favor. Everyone, please lower your hand. Okay, all opposed to the bullet as it now reads, please raise your hands. Okay,
All right, what's the vote?
15 to 3, it looks like. So the motion carries, the bullet is accepted as it's written online now.
Okay, now we can propose a motion just to vote on this, or do we need to now?
Does anybody object to accepting all of these highlighted text on pages 23 and 24? Does anybody object?
As amended, right?
As amended, as it now reads on the screen. Okay,
Can you
Seeing
scroll
no,
back to the top of page 23, please?
yep.
Okay, thank you.
23.
Thank you.
Sure. Does anybody object to accepting all of the yellow text here on pages 23 and 24? Okay, seeing no objection, this is considered approved. Okay,
Right, quick, just a time check-in. We have no more than 10 minutes left before trying to move it to a roll call vote to approve the final report. I think there are just two suggested edits remaining. So
We could go ahead and move it.
I think we should be able to make it through the work today.
okay, great.
Well, let's
right.
not spend a whole lot of time on this last one. Very minor.
Yes, so we just have here decarbonization contractors. I think, what page are we now?
25.
25, decarbonization contractors manage lift large buildings, adding the words and service providers, for example, design professionals, engineers, and architects. Anybody object to that addition? All right, I see no objection. All right. And then on page 26, at the bottom of page 26, adding, we're on the bullet energy efficiency program design considerations, small commercial and institutional buildings. This is a bullet about power. And then an addition at the bottom of that bullet, and it's text in yellow. Note that this recommendation is reliant on the Empower rule changes listed in the priority recommendation, quote, end fossil fuel investment, end quote. Does anybody object to the added sentence? Go ahead, Jared.
I don't object to that. I'm just proposing a friendly amendment. So if you read the full recommendation, it mentions structural improvements, as well as potentially alluding to other improvements that might be funded in the future. Talking to a few of the Empower experts at the Public Service Commission, they said that in the past, just because of the cost effectiveness tests of Empower, those are focused on efficiency first and foremost, and potentially on greenhouse gas emissions reductions pending the legislation's upcoming legislative session. So if things like structural improvements were to be funded through Empower, or potentially health and safety upgrades, if that was to be considered, there would just need to be other Empower rule changes in statute for that to be allowed with current cost effectiveness tests. So for example, if structural improvements were to be desired to be funded through Empower, it wouldn't pass the current efficiency cost effectiveness test, or it probably wouldn't pass a greenhouse gas emissions reduction cost effectiveness test. So I'm not saying to strike anything, it's just to simply add at the end of that sentence, and others. Yep, at the end of the highlighted section. Here, let me pull up the specific language I have down. Sorry, I'm just so it would read, note that this recommendation is reliant on the Empower rule changes listed in the priority recommendation and fossil fuel investment, and this is our proposed addition, as well as other rule changes that would be needed to allow Empower to fund upgrades such as structural improvements.
The structural improvements is already there. You have, as an example in parentheses, so why call out just that one?
Well, so yeah, that's what I was saying. So some of the other proposed recommendations like panel upgrades, et cetera, could theoretically be covered through Empower costs with current cost effectiveness tests and potential future cost effectiveness tests if we move towards a greenhouse gas emissions reduction cost effectiveness test as well. But talking to, I guess as full clarification, I'm not the Empower expert, but having talked to our Empower expert at the Public Service Commission, they said that if we wanted to fund structural improvements through Empower, there would have to be a change in the Empower statute, because everything in Empower has to be cost effective to get that funding.
Could we accomplish what you're talking about by just add the word legislatively at the beginning of this bullet? So it says legislatively enhance Empower.
Yes, I think that would allow for that. Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Let me ask a question. I mean, Are you reading this to say that existing policies and practices, like cost efficiency, are negated by this? I mean, I would read it to say this doesn't remove any existing policies or practices. So I'm not sure it's needed, I guess is my question.
No, exactly. It doesn't remove anything. It would just be if, like I said, if someone
To be explicit that the cost effectiveness policy remains in place.
Yeah, and that's actually exactly, what or it's not like we're saying we are making any specific changes to that. In fact, we want that to stay in place. It's more so just there would maybe have to be something in statute that would need to be added. So, for example, in the Empower statute, if we want to fund structural improvements, then they are not subject to the current cost effectiveness tests. It's just basically allowing that, like having that as a consideration, because in the past, there have been, for example, structural improvement or health and safety upgrades that have been proposed and they just aren't going to pass an efficiency related cost effectiveness test, as well as a greenhouse gas, which could be added in there.
So to move it on, I think that once this is looked into anyway, because structural improvements is actually mentioned here. I mean, whoever's looking into this, they're going to be able to figure out what they need to about the Empower rule, I think. But if it's not a problem for anyone, it's not going to cause us to get off this rail and keep this moving. We can add it if it's not a big issue. Let's figure out where we are really fast, because we only have a couple minutes to go, and this is so minor and it's not a big deal anyway. Let's try not to push this forever. You have a comment?
I was just gonna say, you were concerned about kind of signaling out structural improvements. What if we just added the sentence but said, as well as other rule changes that may be needed?
Yeah.
That way we're not
That's
signaling out.
exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
As well as other,
All right.
yeah, there we go.
Right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, does anybody object to this new sentence with the addition of as well as other rule changes that may be needed? Go ahead, Tom, I think.
Yeah, that's me. Thanks. Look, I just want to go on record. I think it's a mistake to move more and more components of this outside of cost effectiveness tests. And I think the building envelope is one of those that has a difficult time penciling out at times. Just for the record, thank you.
But you're not suggesting a change or objecting to this addition, is that right, Tom?
I'm objecting to the addition.
You want a vote on this addition? Is that what you're saying, Tom?
Have we finished discussion?
Yeah.
I would vote no.
Okay, all in favor of this added sentence, either in the room or online, task force members only, please raise your hand. All right, we have 7 votes yes in the room. How many votes yes online?
5.
5. All right, everyone please lower your hand. All opposed to this new sentence, please raise your hand. Okay, it looks like we have 3 votes opposed and 4 votes opposed. And we recognize also that there are some proxies and I don't know, someone needs to make the adjustments to proxies. Now only 2 votes opposed.
It passed.
It passed in any case.
Okay.
All right, sorry. All right, you can lower your hands now. The vote passed. So the sentence is added to the report. And I believe that was the last substantive edit to the report. We've now considered everything. So I think we can now take a roll call vote to approve the whole report.
Perfect.
That's right. So I can handle the roll call if you'd like. So the way, as we announced early in this process, really adopting a procedure that we use with the state's climate commission, we tend to, for a final report, look for at least 60% the members present to vote in favor in order to advance it as the final report of the task force to be submitted to the governor and the General Assembly. We currently have 17 members in attendance, which means that we need 11 votes in favor to advance this as the final report. So just to be clear, what you'd be voting on is the report as you've amended through today's meeting and previous meeting. So I will do a roll call, starting with the general members and ending with the co-chairs. So if I call your name, please indicate your vote in favor or in opposition with either a yay or a nay. Nicola Tran?
Yes.
Tom LaGuire? Tom LaGuire, are you with us?
The choir.
Tom is online. Tom, we can't hear you.
Maybe we should go on and return to him at the end.
Yeah, Mark, I'm in the same building as Tom. I'll run down and make sure he's online.
Okay, thanks, David. Jared DeLuca?
Yes, on behalf of Chair Hoover.
Thank you. Mark Sivitz?
Yes.
Kathy Magruder?
I'm going to abstain.
All right. Stuart Kaplow?
No.
Delegate Holmes?
Absent.
Thank you. Senator Kramer?
Yes.
Nathan Friedinger?
Absent.
Thank you. And Mark Case from BGE submitted his vote online in opposition to the report. Susan Miller?
Yes.
Thank you. Sharice Seals?
Yes.
Thank you. Bruce Zavos?
Yes.
Louis Retu?
Yes.
Joshua Galloway?
Yes.
Richard Bremen?
Oppose.
Thank you. Luke Lanciano?
Oppose.
Margaret Ann Evans?
Opposed.
Tom Ballantyne?
Nay.
And we received votes online from Greg Ackerman and Carol Ott in favor of the report. So we currently have 11 yeses, which is enough to pass. And we'll go now to the co-chairs. Director Pinsky?
Aye.
Secretary McElwain?
Yes.
All right, and one more time going back, Tom LaGuire, are you online and able to speak?
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I vote yes.
Thank you. All righty. So that's 14 in favor, which is 82.4% of members present in favor. So your report is now final.
Congratulations.
Thank you, everybody, for all your hard work. And I hope everyone felt heard. We did, again, just remember, as we close this out, we extended this report time. I know it was due in December, but we did extend it so that everyone felt that they had an opportunity to contribute. And we really appreciate all of your time and all of your input, and I'm happy that we finally got this done, and great things are going to happen going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we're
All
adjourned.
right. Can I say one thing before you?
Go ahead, Louisa.
Yes.
thank so much the staff at MDE, Cindy and Mark and Allison and some of the folks at MEE as well that have been so helpful during this whole process and keep answering all these emails that I keep saying, "Well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this?" So thank you for all the hard work from the staff.
Well, I appreciate that you threw my name in there. I just want to say that Cindy deserves 99.9% of the credit. She's done a lot of heavy lifting to keep this task force running smoothly. So thank you, especially to Cindy and to IMT, especially Cliff, with all of the great facilitation support.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, MDE staff. All right. Have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Goodbye, everyone.
It's not goodbye. I'm still gonna be bugging you folks about stuff.
Oh, yeah, and we have certificates of appreciation for the members who are present here. And if you're still able to hear us online, we will get your certificates to you some way, somehow. I'm sure Cindy has a plan for that if you weren't able to.
Cindy has a plan.
All right, Mark. Thanks.